To make this shelf unit, I bought 5 boards. They're 18 millimeters thick, and another one that's a bit thicker, 26 millimeters, the kind that are made by gluing together wood strips. Because the wood is a bit open at the ends, I am going to trim a few centimeters off each end of all of them. These 2 woodworking jigs together make a perfect cut. Perfect cut. I always set the stop blocks using the edge that goes at the front of the shelf unit. And I cut the vertical piece that separates the shelves in the shelf unit. I'm going to insert 3 dowels at the top and 3 at the bottom. To position the drilling jig, I use spacers, and I always use the edge that will be the front of the furniture as a reference. And just like that, I made all the holes in the same position on all the pieces. I set a stop block using the measurement of the vertical pieces. These boards give me the same height as the base of the miter saw, and I'm going to cut 15 wooden rods. I cut them from some hoe handles I bought. That's why I have to remove the thicker part, so they lay flat against the fence of the miter saw. In another video, I'll show how I made this jig to drill into the heads of the wooden rods. And a little extra trick I needed for another project. Here we can see how the vertical shelf unit will look. The rods are joined with dowels. This homemade drilling jig worked quite well. But as you'll see in the video I mentioned, making these holes can be quite tricky. Here is where I'll place the vertical pieces. At one end they sit on top of the shelf, and at the other they go underneath, of course. These dowels have been in my workshop a long time, and they've swelled a bit from the humidity. They fit very tightly. I should have gone out and bought new ones instead of risking cracking the wood from the pressure. There they are, 15. And 15 more. They stick out about 1 centimeter. I adjust the jig and the drill depth stop to drill that centimeter, plus a couple extra millimeters. The tip of the drill bit stops about 3 millimeters from the other side of the board. And now, always using as reference the edge of the boards that face the front of the furniture, in theory I can always use the same vertical piece as a guide to drill the holes into the shelves. Or if I number them all to be sure everything fits, I can use the vertical piece that corresponds to each joint. Notice that the dowels ended up spaced just right to fit the drilling jig in between. If they had ended up a bit closer together, it would have been hard to fit the jig into the dowel hole I needed to drill. You already know how this jig works. If not, I'll leave you a link to another video where I build another vertical shelf unit and show exactly how this jig works, step by step. There I drilled on one side, and on the other side of the shelf, the holes go on the opposite face. To drill the holes to join the wooden rods, I use spacers and the lower stop block on the drilling jig. I should also place the spacers from the edge that will be the front of the furniture. Here I clearly mark with pen which side is the front. I didn't realize the rods wouldn't fully cover the mark. Just marking where the vertical piece of board goes would have been enough. And there's no need to mark this one, because it only fits in one way. I also marked the front of the vertical pieces. Well, lots of sanding, with medium grit, then with fine grit. And then a final hand sanding with very fine grit. To sand the wooden rods, I made this contraption using the drill press and the tailstock from a lathe kit I have. We already saw how I set this up in the previous video. I'll leave the link. Look how nice they turned out. Wow. Honestly, it's going to be a shame to paint them. Notice that the dowels didn't go as deep into the rods as they should have. I apply a coat of primer. I apply a first coat of varnish on the wooden boards. Now, a light sanding on the boards and on the primed rods. I apply a second coat of primer. And I paint them red. And I give the boards a second and a third coat of varnish. It is a good thing that I suspected that some of the joints might not fit properly. That's why I checked them one by one. And of course, there's always at least one that is off. I cut off the excess and that's it. Problem solved. Now I'm going to trim the dowels that I inserted into the rods, since they didn't go in properly. Here you have to be careful not to scratch the paint on the rod. And I realize the mark will be visible. Oh well, pretend you didn't see it. These V-shaped wood drill bits will help me clean up the holes a bit. And with a flat blade cutter, I clean off the accumulated varnish. I already told you the dowels had swollen a bit. To avoid trouble during gluing and assembly of the shelf unit, I decided to sand them down a bit, so they fit better. But I need to buy new dowels. And finally, I can assemble the whole shelf unit. Soon I'll show how to make a disassemblable one. I check that everything is square. I build one half, assemble the other half, and I join the two halves to finish making this beautiful wooden vertical shelf unit. And, wow, it turned out really cool. I bought some small metal legs for it. They're angled forward and backward. That way, the shelf unit rests on a wider surface, and it's more stable. They stick out a bit in front, obviously, and at the back, they space the shelf unit slightly away from the wall. Not by much. I think they look great on it. And there it is, in the living room. What do you think? Don't tell me it didn't turn out really cool. Remember, I'm leaving links in the description. Thanks for watching the video, and if you enjoy my videos, subscribe and hit the bell.